Dr. Tenma, all lives were equal to you, and so I was revived. But you've noticed by now, haven't you? The only thing all humans are equal in is death. Monster is a psychological thriller written by Naoki Urasawa, published December 1994 through to December 2001 by Shogakukan through its magazine, Big Comic Original. Today we are going to discuss Monster in its entirety. Welcome back to Infinite Volume. I am one of your hosts, Nathan. Joined with me today are our usual crew. Jay, would you like to introduce yourself again?
What's up, guys?
Alright, that's his new introduction.
I mean, at this point, if people have been listening for this long already, they should probably know us by now.
No one
That's
knows
true.
Logan,
It sounded
though.
like you were reading a eulogy.
Yeah,
were
honestly.
I kind of was.
You're looking at the coffin. I mean, hey, Jaden doesn't know yet.
That's
but
true.
he will
It sounds
find
like
out.
that was quoted from the manga.
It was quoted from the
It
manga.
might have been. Yeah, it might have been.
That was from chapter 159 of Monster, which is fairly close to the very end of Monster.
Yeah.
3 chapters or
That was
3
from
chapters
Johan's lips. So, today's episode is a bit different, guys. Usually, we do a bit of small talk, we have a topic, and then we talk about an indie recommend and go on our ways. But today, all Monster. I know we kind of couldn't hold ourselves back last episode, even the episode prior, as we were reading Monster and started talking about it, but now the deadline has passed. I want to talk about this series in its entirety. It was one hell of a ride reading it alongside you guys. And I want to dedicate an entire episode to that. That's kind of the nature of these book club style episodes. And at the very end of this episode, once we've completely exhausted Monster in its entirety and gone through everything we want to discuss, we will finally spin the wheel again and assign a new book club with a new due date and all sorts of fun stuff. I hope the readers listening alongside have also read Monster at this point with us. If not, it is highly recommended you do so. This will be a very spoiler-heavy episode. There is no hand-holding here. It's hard to discuss the subject matter of Monster without really diving into everything that happens in it. And it is a very mystery-focused story, so you'll ruin a little bit of it for yourself if you haven't already read it. That being said, you are not alone if you haven't fully read it, or haven't read it at all and you're listening, because Jay, our good host friend here, has not finished it.
No, I have not.
But that's okay, because I feel like there's still a lot of value in discussing things with someone who may not know exactly what happens the entire way through. I'd be interested to hear some of his theories as we discuss the inner workings of this series. So, to start us off, let's do a little bit of small talk. Let's just kind of get, the juices flowing. What have you guys been up to? Log, you been watching or reading?
Oh shit, I was muted. Alright, I'm back. I have not been reading anything, nor have I been watching anything. Yeah, I don't have anything to say.
He's existed.
I've watched YouTube, but not anything about
Have you
anime.
played anything recently?
Yes, I have actually.
Okay.
It's this little game called Snow.
Oh,
free skiing.
fuck. This is the first episode that we've recorded
Yep.
since that incident.
Yeah, I don't even want to say I discovered it because Nate and I both had it on our wish list at the same time. And I wish listed it a couple of days before it came out, and then the day it came out, I purchased it, and Nate messaged me and was like, "Oh, I was about to get this game. I'm glad you got it," because we family shared. So the first and second day, it was us competing to see who could beat each other's score, and once we beat it, the other person would get on the account and then play it and beat the other person's score. Then we got about 4 other people to buy the game, and everyone was sitting in the same Discord call or Discord server streaming their runs and competing for the highest score. And it was the most fun I've had on a video game in a very long time.
Yeah,
Single
at this
player
point,
game.
Highly recommend.
it is. Yeah, it is a
SNO.
single player.
Yeah. Snow SNO. Ultimate free riding.
I think it's like
Yeah,
11
ultimate free
bucks.
riding.
It's a very easy purchase.
It's goated, god tier. But yeah, that's consumed my life, and now I'm here.
Yep. That has taken up a significant portion of my free time. It's either been that working on DU or sleeping, I guess. Like I don't really know what to say. Snow's really
And
good.
going to work maybe. That's an
Bro,
important part.
I'm not a sentient human being when I'm at work. I'll tell you that much. Jay, what have you been up to outside of Snow?
Well, outside of Snow, working school. But I did pick up a new anime.
You have been teasing us with this. What have you
Yes,
picked up?
it's called Messiah, I think I pronounced the story.
Huh?
So, it's about these two, they're not they're brothers, but they're not twins. Don't know how that works yet. I've only watched like the first 2 episodes. So, they attend the school that back in 1985, I think it is. They went to so in Japan, for those that don't know, high school baseball is like a big thing, kind of like here in the States. It's kind of like college football is a big thing. Over there, it's high school baseball. So each year they have a big tournament with a ton of schools, and then they compete to be like pretty much the national champion, pretty much. And so it's about this school. It's about these 2 brothers. They attend the school where it was the first time they entered the tournament was 1985, and they won the whole thing. But they haven't been back since. So it's like a one-hit wonder school, and they want to get the school back in the tournament because it's always a big deal. So and one of the brothers, he's the catcher. The other one's a pitcher, but the problem is there's this other pitcher that he's kind of just like he's the star of the team. So he doesn't get to pitch at all. Like the coach doesn't let him pitch at practice or anything. But yeah, I haven't, like I
This
said,
sounds like
not really far
a
into
certain
it.
other anime.
Yeah, it
that
sounds
I've
like a certain
watched.
sports anime that I think I'm banning us from discussing about this episode.
Yes.
Yeah,
We've
so
talked
far,
about I mean, the H word too much.
Yeah.
first 2 episodes. Oh, well, first episode pretty good. I'm on the 2nd episode right now. So far, pretty good.
Okay. Well, I'll be
Nice.
excited to hear your updates on that series next week. I don't like the silence there. It's like you haven't fully committed to watching more of it.
No, listen, I'm all in on it. My thing by next week, I could be done with the first season. Like
That's crazy.
it's 24 episodes. There's 2 seasons. First one's 24. Second one's also 24. So
Isn't it crazy to think about how like you can spend so much time writing or creating something and it takes someone like a literal fraction of the time to consume all of it?
yeah,
Yeah, that is insane.
Like Monster was written in the span of 5, 6, 7 years, I think. And we read all of it within a month.
A week and a half almost for me and you at least.
Yeah. Me and Logue had finished reading Monster, like well before the due date. Like we finished 2 weeks, maybe 2.5 weeks into, the assignment. So it's just crazy that, and I read most of it in like one sitting. Towards the back end of my experience with it. And I think Logue, you were probably the same way, just because like we were so invested in what was going on in the story.
Yeah, I was reading about 20 to 25 chapters at each time I opened up the website, and then when I got to chapter, I'd say about 90, I read like 50 to get up to not 50, like 35. And then I read the entire rest of it in one sitting because it was so hard to put down. I couldn't.
Yeah, looking through to refresh my memory for material for this episode, just for a little context, we took a bit of a break from the podcast last week. So, plus it's been multiple weeks since we both had finished reading Monster that I needed a little bit of a refresher. We blew through that so fast that like my timeline of events of stuff that happened in that manga were like was so horribly abridged in my head. Like I didn't realize like like chapter 20 we're already getting Dieter, and I was like, what?
Yeah, that's a pretty big shock.
Yeah, there's a lot of major characters that get revealed very early on in that story. But I don't want to get too ahead of ourselves here. I think Monster was one of the greatest things I've ever read. I was pleasantly surprised by it. I understand. I think I had said in a previous episode that it's, when you think of big, serious manga, you put Berserk up there, you put Vagabond up there. And I think I put Monster up on that pedestal. And I think I agree with that assessment. I think Monster is one of the most pinnacle adult manga out there. It's hard to make an argument that it doesn't deserve that title, I think. But I'd be interested in what you guys have to say.
I agree. I think my experience with Monster going into it, I know this is a pretty funny thing that happened, but when we first got it in the spin on the first episode, Jaden was like, I'm gonna guess it has something to do with monsters. And I knew that it didn't actually have any monsters in it, but that was about the only thing I knew about it. I knew it was just about real people and real life, but I had no idea it took place in Europe. I had no idea it took place in the time frame that it did, and the themes in it. I had absolutely zero clue, but I was, as Nate said, pleasantly surprised by everything that occurred in that manga. And it's one of my top 3 pieces of media I've ever consumed in my life.
I think I said something along the lines in a previous episode of I think during that wheel spin, I was like, I bet it's like the monster in us, like the monster in people. And I instead of like, a singular entity. And I think I was fairly apt in that observation. I think that is a lot about what the story's about.
Yeah.
Jay, how do you feel about it? What's your experience? Where are you chapter-wise, just for some context for the viewer, and how do you feel about it so far?
For me, it's kind of like because I haven't like read much manga. I think you guys gotta know that.
Mm-hmm.
But for me, I kind of place that as like the top of like from what I've read. It's because I haven't read much. Like I have
you read about a little more than a third actually.
But I mean like
of the whole thing.
I mean like in general, like manga. Like I haven't read like many titles.
Gotcha. Yeah.
Like I've read like Chainsaw Man. I'm pretty much like. What was the first arc I finished? But that's like the only like other one that I've like actually sat down and read a lot of, because I'm pretty much I think I've read like 10 more chapters between like Monster and Chainsaw Man, and I love Chainsaw Man. But this kind of like I don't know, the way that the art it seems like more realistic, where it's like I could sit down, like turn on TV and like actually see this on the news, you know what I mean? Compared to like
that's a good way to put it.
Kind of like even like some of the like slice of life ones, you can't really just like sit down, or like one more for the anime, but like you can just like sit down and imagining it like really happening, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
But I don't know how, like I think it's more based off the art style. It just seems more realistic than some of like the other stuff I've read. You know
now
what
that
I mean?
you say that, yeah, the whole anime eyes trope is almost non-existent in that manga. It's all the people look real, and
yeah,
especially the fact that Tenma is like the only and obviously there's been other depictions of different races and genders and everything like that in the other pieces of manga and anime media, but I think this one does a really good job at portraying what European people look like in real life.
Yeah.
Specifically like Grimmer, and also the fact that Eva Heinemann was blonde and not a redhead. Because
Yeah,
Nate
that
and
was
I
crazy.
both agreed that when we were reading her character and just like reading the pages and her hair was colored in, we both immediately just assumed that she was red. She had red hair for whatever reason, and we looked at the anime and she's blonde. So that was a crazy realization. But in my head canon, Eva is still redheaded.
Agreed.
But yes, very realistic character looks, and they're true to their own ethnicities, and it makes it so much cooler to read.
I actually had a different takeaway about the art style. It reminded me a lot more of like a Sunday morning comic in the newspaper than it did a realistic depiction of people. I understand where where you guys get that, vibe from it, but I thought it felt more like it felt more comic-y than traditional shonen manga to me. And it isn't a shonen manga, let me make that very clear, but it definitely, like, as someone who only pretty much consumes shonen media, it was a pleasant, like, surprise for me to really see manga done in a way that wasn't, like, bombastic panels on every single page.
Yeah, that's true. It does make me think of Simon and Garfunkel a little bit.
It's got that
Like,
Gilbert to it.
the shonen
Dilbert,
stuff.
not Who the fuck is Gilbert?
Gilbert.
Like, Godfrey.
The shonen stuff, it's more like action packed and like trying to grab the reader's attention most of the time.
Correct.
While this is just like you sit down and read this, you're reading it not because of like Dragon Ball. It's like, oh, because I want to see what's gonna happen to Goku next. Like, you're reading this because of how you get hooked into the story within the first couple of chapters.
Yeah, all the focus isn't on the spectacle of the art, it's on the spectacle of the storytelling, or
Exactly. Yeah.
like your favorite character is a couple pages away and you want to see what happens to them next and
It is
what they say. So
it is interesting that I kept thinking that this kind of story wouldn't be too far off of something we would have read in like school, right? Like I feel like this when I think of different stuff we read in school, we read The Giver, we read Catcher in the Rye,
To Kill a Mockingbird.
To Kill a Mockingbird. I feel like this is a story that we could have read as a novel, and these would have been the images that came to mind. But it's really cool, I think, that because of the format of manga, we're able to have images to these characters and still tell a story comparable to those. In all their detail, even if a lot of the panels in Monster are really just like reaction shots of characters, or like a speech bubble and a character speaking, but the content of the story and the context of what's going on from chapter to chapter is so interesting that you really don't mind when the art side takes a backseat, because when the story starts to get to a dramatic point and the art starts to make itself known again, those things are worth it. Those things are really they make or break that story.
Yeah, now that you say that, I was reading through my notes again, and I had a point specifically about the way the story was written and the way it was told. And I said that it unfolds in a way that makes you think, and appreciating the smaller details is much easier when this happens. And the best comparison I can make to this is the most vivid imagination of what's happening just on a page, just in a normal novel that I'm reading through and I'm picturing it in my head, is Fahrenheit 451. Like, when I was reading that book, I could see everything that was happening, and it was so dystopian, and it was such a good book to read because the way it was written made me see it in my mind so easily. And the same thing happens with Monster, where even if a character isn't on the page, the way they set up them leaving the story for however many pages and or chapters it's for, you are still thinking in the back of your head, oh, I wonder what's happening with, for example, Lunge when Tenma is doing this, even though we don't see him in this chapter. And then once he comes back, it just explains what he was doing or what he is doing now. It was just incredible.
Jay,
Yeah.
what do you think about Monster as a whole? Where are
As a
you
whole?
in terms of like what do you think of the story so far? What are your thoughts on Johan?
Johan definitely like has some problems. Like this guy is like the type of guy that should have been like in a fucking in a mental institution from like the age of 10.
Well,
He
And
was in a
like
different kind of
hey, he sure was.
yes, he was. Um, but like I kind of see like at the beginning where like Temna I know I've gone now what you asked, but like for me it's like it all revolves around Temna or Tenma, whatever, however the
Tenma.
hell you pronounce it.
Yeah,
Yeah.
Tenma.
It kind of all revolves around him at the beginning of the story because like you look at chapter one, he's like, or chapter two, whatever it was, he doesn't operate on the mayor. Oh no, so I lied, other way around. He decides to operate on the mayor, right? Or is he
No, you
Yeah.
had
decide
it
to
right the
operate?
first time.
Yeah, he's brought in after the Turkish man, and he operates on
Yeah,
him
yeah,
instead because
exactly.
the director tells him to. Yep.
Yeah. And it's like, so then when Jonah comes in, or Johan comes in, he decides to put him over. I think then that was the mayor,
Hmm.
or was another
Or
like
the
high-ranking
Yeah, I
person.
think the mayor was
Was
the
for
second
Johan.
patient,
Yeah.
and the first person was like an
Yeah.
actor or something.
And he
shit, like an
decided,
opera singer maybe.
yeah, yeah. So he decided to operate on Johan first, which kind of just ends up revolving the whole entire story. Because like for me, the way I kind of thought about it was that Johan, and I think Johan, when they first meet after the murders, Johan kind of like implies like, yeah, I killed them for you, so you could get that promotion. Because if I didn't do that, you weren't getting shit.
Yeah, and Tenma said it under his breath too while Johan was
Yeah.
sleeping. Or he
Well,
thought Johan was in a coma,
yeah.
but he heard everything.
Yeah. But I kind of think that's just like how comas are. I think you can kind of like hear, or there's like that's like a type of coma. Like you can hear what's going on around you, but you just can't like physically react.
Yeah.
Um, but yeah, and it's like Johan was like he did this for him, and then when Temna kind of like goes to like stop him pretty much, because that's kind of like how the whole story is. It's like Temna's whole thing is from the beginning of the story is like I need to stop Johan because now this like it's getting out of hand at this point.
Hmm.
And I know like Johan is that point, and then he wants to meet up with his sister, which is kind of like a a side part where it's like during the time skip is like well like we don't see it happening because of the time skip. Where it's like what happens with Nina and Johan after they leave the hospital, and we learn later on it's like they they pretty much stick together, and then Johan runs away, and then he wants to meet up with Nina. What does he want to do with Nina? I
We
don't.
don't know.
We don't know.
I don't even
I
think you know at this point still, right?
No, I don't think so. I remember him like wanting to meet with Nina. I kind of figured it was just like, yeah, he's probably just gonna just kill her too. Just on like the way the vibe was pretty much at that point.
Have you gotten to the part where they go over the book? because that's a pretty pivotal moment in the story.
Well, he just got to the part where Johan
yeah,
sees
where
it
he-
for the
yeah,
first
yeah,
time.
Johan,
and
like, sees
passes
it,
out
yep.
in the library.
Okay.
So
I don't think he's seen the pages of the book yet.
No, I only
No,
saw
he has
the
not.
one. That's the book that they gave to what's his name? The investigator.
Long,
Long, yeah.
Lunge.
That's
I
the
call him
book that
Long.
that's the book he gets at the end of the chapter, correct?
Yes.
Yeah.
The
I only see that
monster with
one.
no name or nameless monster, whatever.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Now
the nameless monster.
look at me. Look at me. Look at me. The monster inside me has already grown
Yeah.
this large.
Yeah, exactly.
That is I would say that's the, like, there's a lot of crazy reveals that are, like, that it's a part of the mystery and the thriller of it all up until that point. Like, Johan ends up being the killer of those two guys at the hospital, and, like, Nina is actually safe, but she's now in danger after the time skip. But
Yeah.
I think that book is the first real, like, holy shit, I didn't see this coming kind of twist in the manga for me, where I was like, this makes a whole lot of sense and gives Johan, like, a whole other layer that I wasn't prepared to view him in. I don't want to go over the book right now because I don't want to steal that from you, but it's definitely, we'll probably mention it in some capacity in a bit, but it is definitely a very pivotal moment to understanding his character, I think. And there's answers to why he wants to meet up with Nina towards the back end of that book. You literally get this is another thing. I appreciate the amount of detail that goes into some of these chapters, in the lengths that Urasawa Sensei goes through to recreate some of these, the more realistic factual stuff, as well as, creating a world within a world that already has, a strong foothold in reality. Like, this book, written by Bonaparte, was, like, it's not real, right? But what felt so real in the context of the world building for Monster that I think both me and Logue were, like, we had to look into it afterwards to be like, is this a book that existed? Like,
Yeah, it was so... The book was written so much like an actual storybook that we might have read when we were young, even though it was in... it wasn't German, was it? It was some other language. But they wrote it so well that it was just... Seemed like it would be a folktale in Germany.
There is literally
there's
a whole chapter that is half of the chapter is just that storybook from beginning to end. Like, you get the entire storybook. They don't withhold any information about it. So, like, if you're sitting there and you're trying to piece together the mystery of Johan and, like, try to understand where the story might be heading, it gives you all the information. Which is really, it's appreciated. And it does it fairly early, too. Like, I think Logue said you're about a third of the way through the story, Jay. You haven't gotten to that chapter yet, but you're fairly close to that chapter. Like, I think within, like, less than 10 chapters of where you are now, you get that storybook. And it's like, literally drawn like a children's storybook, too. Like, it is... The amount of effort that went into portraying that and making it believable was immense, for sure. On top of everything else that this mangaka makes believable, like, all of the factual stuff mixed in helps a lot, keeping everyone's eyes glued to the news and, like, everything about the wall in Berlin, both before that and after it's fallen after the time skip. All of the, secret police and, like, spy inner stuff that is going on, and, like, all of the other factions. You got to the fire section, right, Jay?
Where
He's
they
right
burn
before
down
that.
like half the.
No. So I'm talking about the town, and I think he was about
Oh,
Where he tries to when the Nazis try to the
Yep.
neo-Nazis try to burn down
The
Turkish
neo-Nazis
quarters, I
are
think it
like
was.
correct, yeah. Those are a pretty pivotal, or not even pivotal. They're just like an important entity in the story because it's like it gives a faction to Johan without really giving him, connections, if that makes sense. Like it gives potential allies to him, or like it adds a whole other threat to the story, even if Johan himself isn't necessarily like in contact with them to the capacity that the author tries to make it seem.
Hmm.
In that that stuff happened. That there's a lot of real authenticity to some of the atrocities that they committed, and I think it's the amount of effort that went into writing this and the amount of research to make it feel the way that it does. This story as a package is beyond commendable. Like I don't think Monster would be nearly as well received or feel as put together without all this background research into the war and like the inner workings of all these politics stuff. It is greatly appreciated and does a lot to help elevate it. I think me and Logue had our own little private discussion just after we had both finished reading, and we brought up the fact that the whole news side of things in the world of Monster, and how everyone there's a constant theme of Tenma gets close to Johan, then he loses Johan, and then he's on the run again. And then somebody finds Tenma because they know he's a criminal, and then you're like, oh, what's gonna happen next? And it's kind of the cycle of that. And it would feel unbelievable, except for the fact that the time period this takes place in, they make it very clear that everyone's eyes were glued to the news and
Yeah.
the TV. Like, this is... The wall just fell, and the wall was such a major thing in the world current events at the time, especially in Germany. So it you don't question for even a second why some random Joe Schmo would recognize Tenma if he's a wanted criminal, because everyone is watching the news. Literally everyone is reading the paper. And his name and face are plastered everywhere.
Yeah, you mentioned in that conversation that in the very first couple pages, Eva and Tenma were watching the news
Literally,
in their
yeah.
apartment.
They
And
make
then
it very
before,
clear.
right after their sexy time, it skipped over to the hospital, where there was also news being broadcast. So
Yeah, I think we literally see the news before we see Tenma do doctor stuff.
yeah, we do.
It's important. I think this story is a lot... It has a lot to do and say about, like, the overall state of the world at that time, and, like, public conceptions and maybe stereotypes and stuff like that. I mean, we saw it in the Turkish Quarter arc stuff. Those... They make a great deal to show, like, all the tension between different factions of people and stuff, and I think, again, just a commendable world building. I couldn't even... It's nice that we got the world building episode out of the way before this episode, because I feel like everything we said in that episode can apply to this in spades.
That's true.
Yeah.
That is a good thing.
It just takes a bit of setting up and attention to detail in the little things, and it carries your story quite a long way, even in sections that I otherwise wouldn't really have been that interested in. Like, there's a lot of moments in Monster where the story kind of takes a detour with a character for like a subplot, but because the general world building and what it could mean for the main cast, because that's so important, these little side adventures that Tenma or Eva or Nina go on throughout the story matter. They matter a lot. and it says a lot about the world and the time period.
Yeah, I had another note that pertained to that point where if a character, no matter how minor the character is, even if they disappear for multiple chapters at a time, they always come back into the story in some fashion. And I think my favorite example of that is when Agent Sook is talking to quote unquote Nina at the bar, and the bartender talks to them in the very, I think when he first walks in, the bartender says something to him, and then at the very end of that, after it all unfolds, Sook goes back to the bar, and when quote unquote Nina isn't there, he's the first person that he asks if he's seen a woman around here. And then the bartender is like, oh yeah, she went down the street that way or something like that. Or maybe he's like, I've seen a bunch of people in here today. I'm not going to recognize just one random woman. I can't remember exactly what he says, but that was, I think, almost 10 chapters, like 5 to 10 chapters, that dude didn't appear, and he's just some random bartender guy. And he was important to Sook's finding out who Nina actually was. Catch my drift.
Speaking of, big gaps in chapters and one thing happening and then it happening again or being brought back up, Logue, I believe you made a pretty cool observation that you'd like to share with the class.
Oh, hell yeah. So, if you refer to the podcast content tab in the Discord, my favorite aspect of foreshadowing in this manga, which it's done so effortlessly, but also if you weren't paying attention to the story under a magnifying glass, if you weren't reading it under a magnifying glass, you wouldn't notice this. But
I missed this entirely, for context. Like,
yeah,
I didn't realize this happened until after we talked about the story, after we had finished it.
So for Jaden's Jaden's perspective, if you open up the third image from that first batch I sent, the one in the bottom left, right?
Yes.
It's Nina and Muller, Muller saved Nina from these, random agents that were trying to kill her, and she was about to kill him too because, he did some bad things, let's say. And he says, I finally realized that I don't want to lose my family and all this stuff, because Roberto was working for him, and Roberto killed his family and a bunch of crazy shit. But anyway, you'll notice that in the bottom left corner, you see him sitting outside of a cafe with a newspaper, and he has a cup of coffee.
Yeah.
And he says, at that cafe every day at 8:30. And then in the very next one, in the bottom right, it's Nina talking to her old mentor, I guess you would say. Can't remember. Oh, Russo, that's his name.
Yeah, Russo.
Russo, who trained her, or he was working at a restaurant, an Italian restaurant, that she was working at part-time while the time skip was happening. Yeah. And he said that he was an assassin, and she didn't know. But you see him lining up the shot on somebody sitting outside of a cafe with a newspaper in a cafe in the middle of the day, lining up the site. And then that was the turning point in his life where he realized, oh, this is not worth it. Like, I'm just killing people to kill them now, and my life is nothing now because I've taken the lives of so many others. I don't even know how many people I've killed. And that's when he tells Nina, if you're going to learn how to use a gun, whatever, this and that. But that whole, I can't even remember what chapter that happens in. The Nina and Russo thing happens at the beginning of volume 4. And Muller happens probably in volumes 8, maybe? 9, I want to say, something like that.
Yeah, that
possibly
segment
even later.
Muller is also a good example of a character that showed up way earlier in the story and then became important again way later. Like, I never thought
true. Both of the cops did.
Yeah, both of those back. So Jay, you've actually seen both those characters already, even if you don't remember seeing them. They were. Do you remember when Nina's foster parents got murdered?
Yes. Oh, and then
They were Muller and the other cop.
were the ones
Both
that
of
picked up
them.
Tenma?
Yes, those characters, they come back and they're like actually important, like plot pieces.
Mm-hmm.
It's crazy.
It was just insane to me that I read that when Mueller came back around, and I saw that image, and I was like, this is deja vu. I've seen this somewhere before, and he mentions the coffee and everything that's the cafe at that day, and I was just thinking to myself, this is crazy, dude. They foreshadowed and also hit it very well. It's insanely cool. I love it. That's all I have to say about it.
No, fair. Is there anything else we would like to discuss about Monster as a whole before I move on to our questionnaire?
Do you have anything, Jaden?
No, not really.
Actually, I guess as a general primer before we get into the questionnaires, we'll go Logue and then we'll go Jay. Who are your guys' favorite characters?
Oh man, my favorite character for the longest time, it was actually Dieter, and then he kind of fell to the wayside in the story a little bit, and he was just hanging out with the doctor, or the psychologist. No, it was the doctor.
Yeah.
Dr. Reichman, I think his name was.
Correct. He was pretty cool.
Yes, he was a dope character because he worked with the actual psychologist and all that stuff. But anyway, Dieter was my favorite for the longest time, and then a little character named Grimmer was introduced, or Grimer, however you say his name, but I say Grimmer. And he is top tier character, 100,000% my favorite character.
Yeah, Grimmer was pretty fucking cool, I'm not gonna lie. He quickly became a top character for me as well. Unfortunately, Jay has no context to Grimmer, but just know that him and the Magnificent Steiner will live on in my heart forever. Jay, who are your favorite character or characters currently?
Currently, I gotta say Tenma. Yeah, I know, kind of basic, but just the way
Tenma's
like
insanely
Nothing wrong.
likable.
the way he
Yeah.
carries himself too. Where it's like, yeah, he's running away. Like technically, he's on the run throughout the whole entire story, as Lunge is pretty much looking for him, because Lunge is convinced that he is the one that was behind all these killings. So the fact that he's on the run, but like he doesn't care. Like if someone needs help, he's gonna help them. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
It's like
He's a
with
selfless guy.
I was like with Dieter. Like he needed help because it wasn't like an abusive foster father.
His foster father was trying to make him into the next Kinderheim experiment.
That's what it was, yeah.
And that's where Tenma first learned about what happened back when Johan was a child. So,
But yeah, it's pretty much Tenma. And I mean, Dieter you can throw up there too, because he's kind of like one of those kids, like he doesn't really like, he's not gonna take shit like at all. Like he's
I'm
like, hey,
surprised how
stay
much
here, and he's
Dieter...
like, nah, F you, I'm coming with you.
I'm surprised how much Dieter like impacted the story and like how often he was around. I was not expecting that from his character when he first got introduced.
especially when he was with Nina in the Turkish quarter and they went to burn it all down for the second time.
Oh, what?
Or the second terrorist attack.
Oh
Yeah.
yeah.
And then
near the river, right? Like
yeah, at the warehouse. But it doesn't happen again like way later on,
What?
where the baby is a part of it, and he's like, "Where's my firework? Where's my dinner?"
Yep,
or whatever.
yep, yep.
Remember? Yeah, that part I'm talking about.
Man, we went
the part Jaden hasn't seen.
we went through 45 minutes essentially without mentioning the baby. That's crazy.
Yeah, the baby is probably my least favorite character. aside from what's his name, Roberto. Fuck Roberto.
Yeah, I hated Roberto.
I put it in my
I liked
notes for
him
a
as a
reason.
villain, but
Yeah, exactly. But he's just a shitty guy. Like,
that
oh
reveal at
man.
the end is crazy. I will say, uh, him turning out to be a specific character that they mentioned in passing to have randomly be brought back into the fold like that was nuts.
Yeah,
I don't want to
it
spoil it for
was.
Jay because that moment kind of like that was a mind breaking moment for me. But that I was very, I don't know. His character again sucked, but in a good way.
Can I just bring up one more thing before we move on to the questions?
Sure. I also want to
I
talk about my
think.
favorite character too before we move on.
Oh, okay. Sorry. No, you can do that first then, and I'll mention mine after.
Okay. Speaking about sucking,
Yo,
Inspector
What?
Lung
boss.
fucking blew, but I
Oh.
loved him. He was
Yep.
the
Well,
best.
he turned around for me too. At like again that panel that you see in the Discord, fucking top right of the second post, the second batch. That was a crazy moment.
Yeah. Jay, right before the podcast started, read a pretty pivotal chapter to Lunge's character. I appreciate how dedicated he is to the bit, I guess, of wanting to capture Tenma, even if it like is a detriment to him, literally his life. Like he will not let Tenma get away because he's so convinced that he has to be the guy.
He literally loses his wife and his daughter.
Yeah.
He kind of reminds me of just like a stereotypical detective from any movie.
Yeah.
Where it's like he chooses that over his well-being.
I appreciate him though, because he does eventually. Spoilers for Jay, I guess, but he does eventually come around.
Yeah.
And he is pretty based for that.
Like-
I like him a lot.
At least from what I've read, his thing is like my thing with him was like he kind of just like, oh, he's Japanese. He pretty much moved up high. He got a higher position of those murders. It had to be him. I like fuck.
Yeah.
And it's
Yeah,
just like,
well, his whole. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
and like his whole thing's like, oh, all these other murders are happening. That's got to be him too. Like,
Yeah, that has to be Dr. Tenma. He's crazy.
That actually leads perfectly into what I was going to mention, and that is Kinderheim children is my favorite power system of any anime or manga. Because that is, I don't know, it's just throughout the story you learn that multiple different characters actually went to Kinderheim and were basically being bred or raised to be the perfect soldier for the time that this was happening in. That makes a lot of sense. But Kinderheim 511's kids were just crazy experiments that turned them into quote unquote monsters. And Grimmer is my favorite one of them, but I have reasonable suspicion to believe that Inspector Lunge is also a Kinderheim 511 child. But I have no actual evidence to prove it, just speculation. But it's my favorite power system. Beats out My Hero, beats out
Well,
JJK,
why not go
beats out
into
Dragon Ball.
go into why you think Lunge is? Because I didn't think so when you first mentioned it, but after you explained it, I was like, oh, that kind of does track.
So, Lunge's whole deal with his detective archetype, I guess, or his detective work is that he can move his fingers on his side or just anywhere, and he's typing things into his brain. And he has this photographic memory, and he's writing down everything anyone says. So he believes that every deduction he makes in his cases is correct because he's only using the facts that have been told to him and that he's written down. So he has a log in his mind about everything that's happened before. And there was a moment where him and Grimmer were, and Grimmer was a known Kinderheim 511 kid at this point. We knew what his power was, and they were both in the hotel at the end. I won't spoil why, but they were both in the hotel at the end, and Lunge is talking to everyone in the hotel about, oh, they were basically bullshitting, and he was trying to get to the real point of why they were there. And him and Grimmer were in the same sort of situation, I guess. They were both there for the same reason. And Grimmer or Lunge say to each other, I can't remember which one says it, but they're like, once this is over, you should buy me a beer, and a good one. And I can't remember if there was something else that happened before that in the story that led me to think that was bringing up something from the past, but I think that Lunge was also part of the same group of kids in Kinderheim that Grimmer was. And that's why they kind of dismissed each other when they first saw each other, but also at the same time didn't really need much introduction to each other to recognize who they were.
All the Kinderheim kids have like ticks, right? Like,
yeah, they all have their certain
I think that was
specialties.
The key evidence that you brought up, that I was like, oh yeah, that does track. Like, Roberto has a tick, Grammer has a tick, Johan has his tick, and Lunge is the only other character in the story really who has a tick like that. So I think it is reasonable to believe that there is a little, they never come out and say it, but I would believe it if maybe I know there's an extra story after Monster. I think it's called Another Monster. It's like basically, I think it's just a light novel that goes over the events, that stuff that like happened after Monster, I think, or like it's like a guy interviewing characters from the story after the events of Monster.
Oh, what the hell? That sounds awesome.
It does sound cool. I didn't feel the need to read it because I felt Monster was a pretty complete package, but I wouldn't be surprised if something like that gets revealed in that story. Well then. Are you guys ready to move on to the questionnaire?
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay. I have set aside 3 questions apiece for you two.
Okay.
They are personalized questions that I thought very hard and long about. Long and hard, hard and long.
What do you mean, maybe?
Yeah, well. Let's get into it because I think these questions really dive deep into the heart of the story, and I think there's some stuff that I thought myself that I couldn't really get answers to. We'll start with Logue. Logue, do you think Monster could have been made in a different format, or do you think manga was the perfect fit?
I think manga, or just writing in general, would have been the perfect fit. If Monster was written by, I was going to say an American, but everyone writes books. If Monster was a book that was written in just words, I think that would also be crazy good. Evident to my point earlier, Fahrenheit 451 was one of my favorite stories I've ever read, and that was all just words because you can put pictures in your head. But this was basically the best of both worlds because you didn't have to imagine the pictures, they were in front of you along with the words. And I think in an anime format, which they do have it loses some of its charm of being both suspenseful and also just pinpointing the details that it needs to at that moment. Because I have a feeling, I haven't watched the anime, but I have a feeling in the moments where the characters are central to the story, they either do nothing to provoke that character's emotions on the screen besides just changing their facial expression. Like, basically, in real acting, you would see, like, little movements in their hands, like shaking hands or stuff like that to signify what they're thinking. But I have a feeling when it was made, didn't really have that going on in anime, so it wouldn't work in that. And definitely wouldn't work in a movie format because Silent Voice has 7 volumes and it still couldn't put all of its stuff into one movie. Never mind 18, 19, I think it was 18 volumes for Monster or something like that.
Yeah, there's
But
162
there's no way.
chapters, and I think the anime
No way.
is 70 or 70.
74 episodes, I
Yeah,
think.
it's nowhere near as many chapters. There's stuff definitely probably got cut along the way.
Yeah.
I don't know that for sure, but just given the landscape of the industry for anime, I have to imagine that they weren't able to fit every small, minute detail in.
I was also going off the assumption that when you said the format of it, I was imagining it not being based off of something, so nothing would be quote unquote cut. I
Correct.
just meant
What would be
the
like the
medium in
ideal
general.
way to tell this story for the first time
Yeah.
to an audience?
Yeah, I think manga and or if it was a book, that's the best way to do it.
I think there are specific moments where manga format really shines. I think for the most part, this could translate really well to a novel. But when I see stuff like Johan pointing to his head in like the different variations of that we get throughout the story, the stuff with his eyes specifically, like the subtle changes in those panels,
Oh, I
I feel
didn't
like you
post
can
that one,
only
did
do
I?
in a manga.
I gotta post that one.
But yeah, I agree for the most part. Jay.
I just want to add on that too.
Oh, sure.
I think too, if it was made like by Marvel, I don't think this story would have gone through till the end.
If this story was made by
If it
Marvel,
was like if you know,
that's
you
an
know, like,
interesting what if. Because I feel like Marvel sometimes can cook with this kind of like realism stuff.
I think
right?
they can, but I just don't think it would have. I don't think it would have been pushed to be finished, and it would have just like fallen
Yeah,
short.
yeah, that's fair.
Because we're with like, especially like here in the States, our main thing is Marvel and DC are like our 2 big comic book companies. So like I know a lot of people see like them as just superheroes, but like Marvel makes the Star Wars and and they make some other stuff too. Where it's like, for me, it's even like the art style that like Marvel uses. It's there is differences in between like the different like comics,
Mhm.
but overall there is like, you like if you look at them side by side, you'll tell like little differences, but it won't be much. Like if you gave it to someone that like doesn't read comics to be like, is this from the same exact comic? Like, because it's very very similar. Whereas like with manga, you're able to, the mangakas they're able to put their own like, not everyone has like used the same art style, you know what I mean? A lot of the art styles are very 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 different.
I get what you're
And
saying.
yes, there's some that
everyone
have
has
like,
their own flavor in
yes,
manga.
and like there's some that do like, they do like a lot of people that like grew up with Toriyama. They try to like replicate his style, but it's not as much as like in Western comics.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I don't think the story would have been told like the best way if it was made by, if it was a Marvel comic made by an American. I think the fact, and this is more towards like the mangaka's ability, like of how great he is or was. I'm not sure
Yeah.
if he's dead or not.
I think he's still
I
alive.
think he's alive.
Urasawa's style, I don't think now that Monster has been made in that style, I don't think you can make Monster in any other way. Like it's
No.
such a pivotal I said pivotal so many times this episode. Holy crap! Is that the word of the day? Um,
Maybe.
it's such a integral part of the story at this point. Like it is just monster at this
Yeah.
point. You can't take it away from it.
Yeah, and he is
Like
still
I
alive,
thought
double check.
a live action monster would probably do fine,
Yeah.
but I feel like you miss out on so much detail in the artwork specifically. If you try to do something like that, I feel like that way about a lot of live action stuff, but this specifically, I feel like there's so many small, minute details that you can lose in the fold of pursuing something like that. All right, Jay, it's time
Yep.
for your question. Are you ready?
I guess.
Where were you on the night of September 8th, 9:47 p.m. back in 2015?
Probably home.
Yeah? I don't know why you're laughing, Logue. This is a serious question.
I'm laughing. I was just looking at something else.
Yeah, that's what I thought. Well, what are you fucking laughing? Sorry, I'm getting emotional. All right, so you were at home. You weren't doing anything in particular
I don't think so.
at that specific time and that specific date?
I don't know. That was like 10 years ago. Like, the fuck am I supposed to remember that?
Well, actually, it wasn't 10 years ago.
Almost 10 years ago.
And I mean, now I feel like you're trying to avoid the question. Well, we'll come back to this. Logue, I have your second question.
All right, I'm ready.
All right. Would you have preferred if Johan died at the end? Would his death have changed any overall themes within the story?
So wait a minute.
Yes.
Wait, what?
Oh well.
This is what he didn't. Wait, Temna never. Wait, what? He never killed him?
Okay, major spoiler warning.
Yep. I put that at the
Even
start
though
of the
we already
episode.
said it. That's true. But for this is specifically
Yeah,
for
for Jay.
Jaden. If you, I was gonna say if you don't want to hear this, then turn your deafen.
No,
but
I'll listen to
I
it.
everyone
don't
else
think-
already knows.
I don't think it changes all that much of the experience of Monster to know whether or not Johan dies, which is why I wrote this question.
Yeah, that's true.
I kind of
So,
figured that he was just gonna die at the end.
Johan does not die.
He does not, no.
Okay, I will say this. He doesn't die in a very unexpected way and thematic way. So it's definitely worth reading the rest of the manga when you get the chance. But Nina also does not die. Nina and Johan are alive.
I figured
Yeah.
she would survive.
And, okay, so I think the main reason it would change so much is because, and back when Jaden was saying this earlier, I realized, because when I finished the manga, I didn't think back, I didn't harken back to all the way at the beginning, quite literally, apparently within the first 20 chapters, because that's when we meet Dieter, and it happened before that, when Johan was in his coma, and the very end is literally the same exact shit as the beginning. Quite literally.
The manga ends the same way it starts, for the
It
most
ends
part.
the same way it begins, and I think that is always the coolest shit when something like that happens. I don't have any examples right now of any other media where that happens,
I know.
but
Do you...
It
I
happens in
actually
Attack on
do have a
Titan.
moment.
At one point. Like, if you know what I mean.
Yeah, but Attack on Titan has a lot of, like, fucking... I
Yeah,
get
but
what you're
I mean,
saying. I get what you're saying, yeah.
Like, after we find out, like,
I was gonna say, like, a bunch of time shenanigans, but I understand what you mean by
like,
that.
what's her name? Anna.
Who?
And then,
Oh,
that-
the blonde chick. Yeah.
yeah, and then, can you remember the other two names now? Where they, like, pretty much,
Reiner,
yeah,
maybe. I don't know, I haven't watched it, but...
oh, bro,
I'm just
I
guessing.
Isn't it Bernholt? Is that the other one?
Bernholt and, I think it's, like,
Those three, Titan,
Yeah,
like,
Berthold,
Titan
yeah,
Reiner,
Transformer
because they
boys.
attack,
Yeah.
they attack, like, where, Aaron's from.
Yes.
So it's like,
And that...
I think it's the end of season 2? I think.
Spoilers.
Oh, sorry. I think
No,
it's the
I
end of
think-
season
Okay.
2 where it kind of like jumps back, or the beginning of season 2, whatever. So it jumps back to where they first attack the village. Or maybe the end of season 1. Nah. I think it's
Anna's fight is the end of season 1, and Bernholt and Reiner are the end of season 3, I think.
when they
Yeah, I
attack
don't remember
when they
seeing
attack
them
the
in season
village.
2.
Yeah.
It's but it's like something like that where it's like it ends where like the story and like even like the
That
like
might
the
it might have been
names
season 2, but
the names of the episodes. If you look at the names of the episodes, the name of episode 1 is I'll pull it up. Give me a second.
Just gonna pull it up.
I'm
just gonna
pulling
pull
up
it up.
Attack on Titan. If you look at episode 1 is to you 2,000 years in the future.
Yes, I remember this actually because
And
I
then
also I felt a little something in me heart when I read it.
no, it's season 2, so it has to be season.
Doesn't the final episode have a similar name to
Oh,
that?
it might be the last episode. No. Oh, episode 80. From you 2,000 years ago.
Yeah. I remember that.
And it like replays the events from the first episode, I'm pretty sure.
I remember
From-
that. I remember that.
From their point of view.
That's pretty sick.
Which is crazy thing about considering the fact that episode came out in 2022. The first episode came out, just a year before. But even like if you look at the manga when the chapters came out, where they happen respectively, it's probably a lot longer.
Yeah. The to backpedal a little bit, the whole like ending where you started thing. I think a big theme in Monster is these characters went through so much within the time span of this manga and its runtime, and the entire time it's a major theme of whether or not Tenma is going to shoot Johan. Is he going to kill Johan? How is he going to, reconcile, and how is he going to repent for bringing this monster, in quote, to the world? And how is he gonna, what's going to happen with that? And I think the way the manga ends, answering that question, in a way that only Dr. Tenma could have answered that question. I think back a lot to the scene in Undertale where your character looks in the mirror at the start of the game and it says, it's you. And then, like, at the very end of the game when you look in the mirror again and it says, even after all that's happened, it's still you. I think it's a very similar beat there of no matter what Tenma went through as a character, he still is, at the end of the day, Dr. Tenma. And all the people that, believed in him throughout the story and all the horrible things that happened to him didn't affect him in the way that maybe he himself might have thought it would have affected him by the end of it. And I appreciate the story for that.
Yeah, even I remember this as you were saying that. Another reason it would change the whole thing after what you just said is that the book ending with "and there would be no one around to call me by that name, and Johan was a wonderful name," and then at the very end before Tenma has that like hallucination of Johan waking up, he says, "and I heard your real name," or "I talked to your mother, she loves you very much, and I heard your real name, you had a name." So it's basically concluding with Tenma telling him his name, and that way it reverts everything you know about that story, or the ending to that story. It changes the ending of the book, therefore changing the ending of the
Monster.
story and the
Yeah.
rest of Johan's life. It is so good.
There is a kind of fate in the story, if that makes sense. I don't really know how else to put it. That, like, there's like an omnipotent force that kind of, or it feels like an omnipotent force where Johan, no matter what happens, cannot be killed. He is so confident in his ability to not be killed, that nothing bad will ever happen to him. But he can do whatever he wants. He exists in a reality where he doesn't exist. I feel like that
He's
is
the nameless monster.
exactly. And at the very end of the story, when that person pulls the trigger, I feel like that's when the story shifts from living in a fairy tale to finally, after 160 chapters, coming to reality of it being like that was never the case. It was just all, this big, like, it was basically in everyone's heads. Right?
Yeah,
like
it was all happening the way the story set it out to happen, but it could have turned wrong at any moment.
Literally any
that.
moment, yeah. And I think Tenma telling Johan that he had a real name this entire time put that in a perspective for me. That everything, all the events of the story, not that they could have been avoided, but I don't know, it makes you appreciate the events more, I guess. Like, anything could have happened at any moment. It was just that Johan was so convinced, and Tenma was so convinced, and Nina was so convinced that this story was essentially running the script of their lives, whether they realized it or not. That they managed to get themselves to that point. You see Lung go through that when he finally, when he has his heel turn and he's like, okay, but what if this person doesn't exist that I'm chasing? And he starts to believe in that kind of stuff. Like, it's hard to put into words what exactly it is that's driving these characters, but that drive is really the main antagonist at the end of the day. I wouldn't say Johan is, a villain. He's more so a victim of circumstance more than anything else. Driven by that book and the story it was telling. And to see them break free of that at the very end was... The story would have changed immensely, in my opinion, if Johan had died. It would not have had the impact that it did, and it wouldn't have held the same weight, I feel. Jay, I have another question for you.
Oh my god.
Are you ready?
Sorry, I'm laughing at something else.
I guess.
If you killed someone, hypothetically, and had to stash the murder weapon, like, in the back of your Ford F-150, where would that hypothetical truck be now, and why would you want to paint it dark red?
Well, I was gonna say at the bottom of the ocean.
What ocean?
Any ocean. There's 7 of them.
It's a lot of ocean to check. You can't narrow that down for us?
No.
Excuse me.
What kind of weapon would you use? Blunt? Would it be a blunt weapon, perhaps?
Pointy?
So,
It definitely wasn't pointy.
Oh, okay.
I don't think a blunt, cause then I think it'd be easier to narrow down, like, who killed them.
Okay.
Because it's easier to get DNA from it. Probably like ranged weapon.
A ranged blunt weapon, perhaps. That would make sense. There weren't many traces at the crime scene. Okay. Logue, I have a final question for you.
Ask away.
Would you consider Monster to be an easy recommend for someone who hasn't read manga, or would you think that you get more out of Monster from having already read a ton of manga?
I think it depends on the person, because, for example, the reason I recommended it to my mom, well, I recommended she watch it, but that's only because she doesn't really read a lot, so I wasn't going to tell her, hey, you should read this. But I recommended she watch the anime because she is really into documentaries on, real life crime crime committers. That's what I was gonna say. I'm gonna go with it. Real life crime committers, not criminals.
Real life crime committers is crazy.
She watches like jail documentaries and all that stuff and detective shows. So I think her, and why I recommended it to Sydney the other day was because she also said that she was
Sydney.
Yeah, she expressed her interest in documentaries on serial killers and true crime, stuff like that. So if you're into that kind of stuff, I think it's an easy recommend for, even if you've never read any manga. If you like reading in any capacity, I think you will get hooked on it if you are interested in the genre that it is. But for somebody who is not interested in any of that, I wouldn't say it's an easy recommend. I would say I would recommend it to them along with a few others that are easier reads, or just shonen, or something that's more digestible and doesn't have so much thinking power going on.
You said to me during our private discussion about the story that I keep bringing it up like it was like some crazy classified conversation. that brings a smile to my face every time.
Come on.
Yeah. We should have recorded that for sure.
We definitely should.
You said that this story changed how you view manga. Do you want to bring that up in the podcast?
Yeah, sure. So, I can't remember exactly my main... Well, obviously that was my main point,
changed, but... You were like... You couldn't... Before Monster, you couldn't see a story like Monster working in manga. Like, it kind of changed your perspective as to what a manga could be, instead of just like a shonen series. Or just like a slice of life.
Yeah, so I started... As I was reading the story, I realized that... And this actually goes back to my other point that I just made pretty well, is that if something works, or if something is popular in another form, for example, the true crime genre, or killer documentaries genre, that it wouldn't really work that well in another genre, or not another genre, another form of media. And while I was reading Monster, I was thinking, there's a bunch of adult anime or adult themed anime, and there's also, obviously, if there's manga for those anime, there's adult manga. But I kept thinking that Berserk was the adult manga quintessential because it had, gore and blood and swearing and,
has a lot of sex.
Sexual
My
assault.
God.
And so basically a lot of adult themes that just quote unquote make it adult. You know what I mean? Like, that's like saying a movie is rated M for mature, or rated R because sorry, rated M for mature. That's like saying a movie is rated R because there's drug use and foul language in it, and not the actual theme of the movie itself. For example, Deadpool and Wolverine is rated R because there's some very vulgar jokes and also people being cut in half by a dead Logan's bones. Anyway, that's in the first scene, not a spoiler. But basically, that movie is a form of adult media because it's just gory, or stuff that a kid shouldn't watch. But at the same time, the story, the subject matter is not adult in any sense because it's telling a superhero story. And this manga changed my way of viewing adult mangas, or just mangas that have adult themes to them, because This one wasn't adult because it had a bunch of blood and gore. Like, yeah, people die every now and then in the story, and it shows the blood and the weapons and beatings and everything like that. But it is just so... The story itself and the subject matters are so unadulterated and just mature that it made reading it feel like it was actually made for adults rather than, you know, just a kid's anime being turned up to 11 by, you know, let's say Deku flicked his fingers at somebody and it ripped them into shreds and they just all their blood splattered across the wall. Like, that would just be making something adult to make it adult. But this one was actually, it just changed my viewpoint on what I view as adult media. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I get that. That I had that experience with Berserk, even though we joked about it not too long ago. Genuinely, it did change how I viewed adult works and like the kinds of stories you can tell when you have stuff like heavy gore and heavy adult themes, but handle them in a way that like matters thematically. Like, it can cater to the audience that just wants to see, you know, those boomer shooter doom heads out there, but it also like a lot of the stuff when it has meaning in the story can hit different for sure.
It's like Duke Nukem versus Silent Hill. You know what I mean? They both have guns.
Jay, I have one final question for you. Are you ready?
Yeah.
Who's Daphne?
What?
No, who's Daphne?
I don't know.
No, that...
This one's easy, bro.
Yeah, you should know this.
From fucking
Are they in the
Scooby-Doo?
back of your Ford F-150 right now?
I don't even have a Ford F-150.
In the bottom of the ocean. You had a Ford
you don't
F-150.
have it anymore before you drove it into the ocean, you know?
On September 8th at 9:47 p.m. back in 2015.
What the fuck are you talking about?
I feel like we'll have to revisit this. I feel like I'm close to the answer, but you refuse to see the answer for yourself. All right. That's Monster. What a crazy first story to have as the book club.
I am so lost.
Assignment.
I like it.
What's up?
That bit,
Well, it's 'cause you didn't
I'm
finish
laughing
the
at something
story.
else. It's fine.
If you finished Monster,
That's true.
then you wouldn't be so lost. That's what we were talking about for a minute and 22. All right, a minute for an hour and 22
minute and
minutes.
22 seconds.
No, I'm more lost on like
I don't know
my
what
three
you're-
questions.
What? Well, don't worry about those. Don't worry about those. I'm glad it was our first story, though. Real talk. I'm glad I read it. I could have gone my whole life without reading this story, and I think that can be said about a lot of different stories, obviously, but like, I feel like this one specifically would have been a detriment not to have read. I am very happy for my own, writing and career that I have read this, and I can now pull from this for like world building examples and stuff like that. Just it's good food for thought for sure. But now that the book, by the way, we never came up with a name for the book club. Like, to this day, it is just the book club.
Do that?
Yes, we made a whole bit about that.
You know, everything happens for a reason, man. I think we should just call it the book club.
The book club.
Nah, actually, maybe we shouldn't.
I kind of vibe with it though. I kind of vibe with it.
I do. I think if we come up with a better name, we can change it. But
yeah.
as of right now,
the book club
it's just
name
the book
pending.
club.
Speaking of the book club, we now get to read a new book. You guys excited?
Mm-hmm.
Yes, sir.
Yeah.
I'm excited. Even though I read all the fucking time, every day, every waking moment of my breathing existence on this earth, I'm reading something. I now get to read a whole new book with you guys. And today, we have the wheel, and we don't just have the wheel. I remembered to record the wheel, which is important, because last time we didn't do that. So
That's true. Are
You're
you gonna
gonna-
stream it
yeah.
for us?
I
in
am
Discord?
going to stream it in Discord for you guys. So
Okay, sick.
give me just a second to prep. I'm going to switch. Oh my god, my my OBS is fucked. Give me just
Oh,
one
God.
sec. It is turbo fucked. There we go. Let me just get
What the
this.
hell is
leg.
HXH? I'm
Hun-
kidding.
hun-
That's a
okay.
joke. That's a joke.
Okay, my bad.
Nobody-
Listen.
Nobody come at me. I also don't say X, by the way. That I'm
just
well
Hunter.
versed in that. Hunter. Yes, exactly.
Okay. I am now recording the capture for the wheel. It is now up on screen for our lovely listener / viewer at home. There's a lot of good ones on here, guys. Some of these I have read and or watched to completion, but the other two have varying degrees of experience with these. Some
Well,
of
there's
these,
a couple that I have read or watched. to
exactly,
completion.
yeah. Some of these, none of us really know that much about. Some of these I've seen in passing, and I think the same can be said with you two as well.
Mhm.
I think landing on any of these will be a really interesting experience. So let's shuffle
Wait,
this.
wait. Before you spin it, it's at 24, and it's like triggering my OCD. I actually have one more recommendation. Two
Okay.
More Eternity.
Ooh, yeah, I do gotta finish that. So your eternity. That is a great one though.
No, that's spelled wrong. I think
It's okay.
there's no N after the E.
To your E. Alrighty.
Okay, there we go.
You guys ready?
Yes, sir.
I'm ready.
Let's spin the wheel. And the next book club story
yes.
is.
Oh my
please.
god.
Yes.
Homunculus.
Oh,
Yes.
That's crazy.
Sorry, Jaden.
Jay was so
That is
excited
the
for
closest
Vinland
wheel
Saga.
spin I have ever seen.
Homunculus is crazy. That's another pretty heavy story, I think.
Yeah. Maybe should we save this one for a different time? Should we re-roll?
I agree. Let's reroll.
Yeah, is it getting vetoed? Or
I don't know. I
vetoed
feel like
Homunculus?
it would just be kind of not boring, but just like having two of the same book
I can-
clubs
you
in
know
a
what?
row where
I
it's
will-
also very adult.
I do want to have the next book club have a bit of a different tone. So let's
Yeah.
give that another reroll, shall we? The first
get this
reroll
fucking same thing. Oh my
veto.
God.
Let's go, baby.
No.
What?
Oh.
I thought I removed this.
What?
So this was a recommend
All right,
from
reroll.
AJ. God,
Reroll.
cut! Stop the footage.
Wait, no, it's on.
Who cares? Don't worry about it. Final reroll. Whatever we get, this is what we're doing.
Oh my god.
Oh,
Yes.
sound-
I don't know.
okay,
This one's
I'm-
pretty
Let's
dark
go.
and gritty, guys.
Bruh.
Nah, we'll
I'm
do it
fine
a
with
silent
This
voice.
one's
I'm
dark
fine
in a
with that.
different way. And it's not even dark. It's just very heavy. Well, actually, we said that about the fucking homunculus, but
I'm fine with
I don't
that.
know. This one's more lighthearted than Monster, at least.
When I first watched this movie,
I cried 4 times.
this changed my life. So the way I view certain aspects of my life, this is going to hit different, I think, reading this now that I am
Oh,
a
yeah.
more well put together adult. So this should be interesting. Jay, what is
Yeah.
your experience with the silent voice?
Nothing at all. But I already found
Oh,
my
I can't
God.
wait. I can't wait.
it.
So
It's been
a
on
s-
my watch list, like
yeah,
my into watch list.
a silent voice has
62.
7 volumes.
7 volumes and how many chapters?
62.
62 chapters. At the time of recording, it is 12 o'clock in the morning on March 1st. So let's shoot for March 28th. You guys think we can read through 60 chapters?
28th. I feel like we should make it a week before that.
The 21st?
I think
think
we
so?
can do it in 3 weeks. Yeah.
Yeah, I could probably get through it.
It's 62. Jaden read all of, 69 chapters of
I
Monster.
kind of want to give Jay a bit of a extra grace period so that he can finish Monster. But
'Cause, like,
maybe
I know,
maybe
like-
that's,
Oh.
I'm being too kind.
Nah, I think I'm just.
I mean, he has 100 chapters left, so.
You're gonna just jump to silent voice, pretend
Yeah.
like Monster never happened. Okay. Well, then we can
Put
do
it
the
on the back
21st.
burner.
How's the 21st sound, guys? 21st good?
Good.
Sounds good to me, yeah.
Okay.
21st for
Then
recording.
correct.
Not for
Yes.
the
So-
upload.
I hope this was a very special episode for a lot of people. It was a special episode for me. Thank you guys for being on this journey so far with me. I hope this is a start to something that will go on for a long time and will provide us with many experiences as we go. Too real for you
Have a-
guys? My bad. Oh, yeah,
good.
yeah, yeah, just cut
Have a
off.
good.
Have a good.
Have a good.
Have a good, guys.
I thought that was a pretty good way to end it.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.